And some of you know we've been doing these Buddhist studies classes for a long time, more than 20 years. And it's a 5 or 6 year curriculum for those of you who are new. And we do ask that people who are enrolled or taking the Buddhist studies class, that you be somebody who has an ongoing practice. So we made up somewhat artificially a criteria that you've gone on a few residential, not residential, but in-person, day-long, half-day, or residential retreats, and that you have a commitment to sitting every day. Doesn't mean you do sit every day, but your aspiration is to sit every day, and that you have time in your life, not just to sit, but to do a little study. Some of you hopefully will do more than a little study, and that you attend the small groups every other week, whether you're online or whether you're here in the room. On week 2, 4, and 6, the last 20 minutes we have small groups, and it's a chance and a training to talk about what you're learning in your actual practice. When you sit down and meditate in your daily life, when you're practicing, where you're taking, the whole point is that we're coming together in a way, we're gathering around the teachings of the Buddha, in this case, the Buddhist teachings on the hindrances, what it is that hinders the stability, continuity of present moment awareness. Like, why is it so hard to be present for more than a moment at a time? What is it? Well, in these 6 weeks, we're going to get interested in that. Shelly, Graf, and I will be taking turns teaching and kind of unpacking these teachings and the practices around how we can illuminate what gets in the way of the continuity of present moment awareness. And how can we relate to what gets in the way in a way that it doesn't get in the way anymore, or it isn't, it's almost like we're not going to like snap our fingers and not have sense desire, or not have aversion, or not have dullness or restlessness or doubt, right? These are the 5 hindrances that we'll be looking at. No, they're pretty deeply conditioned into the mind stream, so they're going to keep showing up. But what will happen is an understanding will gradually develop. So when sense desire gets triggered in my mind, or aversion, fear gets triggered in my mind, or I become low on energy, my mind's a muddle, I get hyped up and I'm frazzled and restless, or I'm spinning with doubt, there will be a wisdom and awareness that recognizes, oh yeah, this is just doubt happening. It feels, it looks like this. So wisdom and awareness can neutralize the ill effects of these unskillful, unhelpful hindrances. What hinders the stability, the continuity of present moment awareness? And that what neutralizes is wisdom and that awareness together, that then recognizes this is just a hindrance. It's that tendency, like with tonight, I'll talk about sense desire, right? So when we talk about sense desire, we're talking about that compulsive, obsessive, addictive net, getting caught in wanting a sense experience, wanting comfort, for example, as if it's going to really fix me, fix the moment in some substantial way. And the mind just sort of grips on to that idea. Like, one of the things we'll notice with sitting is like the desire to move, or the desire to plan or think. And it can feel so confining, like to suggest to ourselves, well, maybe I don't have to do that. Maybe I don't have to move the body. I could. It's not against the law. Or maybe I don't have to think that thought about tomorrow. I could, but maybe instead. So that's that challenging, realizing that just because there's a strong compulsion to have a sense experience doesn't mean we actually have to act on the compulsion. And the more we, in a way, call its bluff, really changes our life. So I'll talk about that a little later after the meditation. Yeah, so if you have any questions about the prerequisite for the Buddhist Studies class, or what it's about, just reach out to me or to Shelly Graf. And as I mentioned, there's this component of study too. So it's not just the talks, which I'm recording. So those of you online, I've spotlighted myself because we directly record to the YouTube live stream. And so the class will sit up, each class will sit up on the YouTube channel. If you do want to revisit it for whatever reason, or if you're busy on a Monday night and you miss it, you can always listen to it later. And so you'll be getting the input from Shelly, Graf, and myself as we reflect on our own practice in the Buddhist teachings. And hopefully you've received the email I sent out earlier this afternoon with some articles there. And I always will send out more than a few. Not everyone reads everything, and that's totally fine. And you can just sort of use your common sense and your intuition to see what of the study resources might be useful for you and how much time you have. Yeah, and just like you let a talk inform how you practice, you can let some of that reading material inform how you practice. And we're learning this art of contemplation because you're getting new information through the talks, through your own study, and then you're going to memorize or retain some of that well enough that you can regurgitate it in real time during a sit, during your daily life, so that you can then use that information to affect how you're opening, how you're connecting, how you're framing the present moment experience. That's the point of the study, the talks, the readings, so that you become independent with that information, and then you can bring it to bear on how you're connecting, relating, experiencing the present moment. Because the Dharma as teaching to, the talks and the readings, they're there to affect how we frame, how we experience. It's like a counterweight to our habit. So like normally when the tendency for me to want something, sense desire, arises, my mind tends to frame sense desire as, yeah, there's really me here who really wants that. And when I get that, I'll really be better, right? That's how the mind frames it. And then we get some of these teachings, we'll see that tendency to frame the sense desire in that personal way, but we'll have these teachings, some of the teachings that are resonating, and they'll exist in our heart as a counterweight to the force of habit, which is basically to believe the promise of our sense desires. If I get that thing that I want, I'll be happy in a substantial way that will change my life. And if I don't get it, I'll be a suffering human being. It won't be okay, right? And so we're going to use the teachings as a counter programming. Like we have another way of looking at this sense desire, of getting close, up close and personal with it. So we can see it maybe for what it is, not see it in the habitual way, the way we've been programmed, but in another way. So that's all just in the service of, not so much that you have to take notes during the talk, but like later tonight or tomorrow, just to notice what, maybe just like one little teaching is still resonating from tonight's talk. And then make it your own. Like, why is it interesting to me? Oh, so you're basically connecting the dots, like, what Mark said, or that quote that Mark read, that connected to my experience or to some learning, actual learning I had in my life, and this other experience. And it's almost like we're integrating. This is the middle part of wisdom. The first part of wisdom is getting new information, right? We need new information. Otherwise, we're just going to keep doing the same stuff and getting the same results. And then we've got to integrate. We've got to start to own that new information. We have to be semi-independent. Doesn't mean we really get it in a direct sense, but we're interested in it, and we can regurgitate it, and we can learn to apply it to the moment, to use it to connect. That's the middle. You can call that contemplation or reflection. So we need new information. We need to reflect on the information. And then that leads to the third part of wisdom, which we call insight or Vipassana. This is a Vipassana meditation center. So in the early Buddhist tradition that Common Ground's part of, here in the West, we often call our different retreat centers and city centers Vipassana meditation centers. That word Vipassana means to see something we haven't seen before, to realize something we haven't realized before about the nature of our mind, the nature of experience. And it's because of this process of getting new information, working with it, reflecting on it, contemplating it, applying it, so that we're connecting with the present moment, influenced by the new information. And we're finding, oh, this new information I've picked up from reading and listening, I can really, in a sense, get closer to the experience of sense desire without getting swept away by it. And I can really see it now better as a natural phenomena here and now in my mind. And I can see it for what it is. And the more we're in that more intimate place, all of a sudden, the mind's understanding will shift. And that's what we mean by insight. It's like that being intimate with sense desire over and over many, many times, all of a sudden will lead to a real shift where the habit of taking sense desire personally, for example, all of a sudden gets substantially weaker. Now we see it as a more natural, impersonal process. It doesn't feel so sticky because we've had some insight. Oh, that's just what the mind does. It's not really a mark who will feel betrayed if he doesn't get, right? It just starts to seem, even the inner territory of our heart and mind begins to seem more naturalistic and impersonal, and just stuff unfolding naturally according to so many causes and conditions. Oh yeah, this is just how it is. And that's just that natural process. That's why there is this element of study involved right from the time of the Buddha on, where people would hang out with a wiser elder on the path, or the Buddha himself maybe, get some new information. They'd go off and practice on their own for a while, maybe hang out till they got a gem that seemed useful, a little teaching that seemed that they could kind of hold on to, work with. And so, we'll be getting a lot of information these 6 weeks. Don't feel like a lot of it is just going to go on some shelf in our mind, and that's okay. We just want to work with some of it. And then that makes for the material that you can bring back every other week when we have small groups. And I know for some of us, the small groups are really intimidating. And I just encourage people to just take the medicine. That's part of the Buddhist Studies program, is this small group every other week. And so it's really not appropriate to sneak out at the end of the class next week when we're about to start the small groups, or those of you at home to leave before the small groups. There is the live stream which doesn't involve, you're not there with other people on Zoom, you're not in this room with other people. So you can always watch the live stream. But I strongly encourage folks to be fearless and be part of the small groups. You can always pass if in that moment you don't have anything to say, but you might have something to say, especially if you wait and let other people go before you. And the last thing I'll mention for those in the room, we need some program hosts to help get the room set up and close up at the end of the night. So if you could if you're interested in helping out in that way, it's a really great service. Just stay after for a few minutes tonight. And basically we'll meet a little early next week and I'll train you in, or Shelly will train you in next week how to do that. Good, and like I mentioned, if you have any questions about the Buddhist Studies class, just send them to the office or send them to me if you have my email address. And I'll get back to you, or Shelly will get back to you. So I've just put into the chat, and the people in the room, we have the 3 refuges, and one of the traditions over many decades now that we've had this Buddhist Studies class is we chant the 3 refuges. We take refuge in Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, and then this might feel a little strange for some of you who are new to Buddhist practice. But Buddha, here it's printed as Buddhang. That just means we're taking refuge in being awake. That's what that word means, being awake. Like this capacity, I think, every one of us online here in the room, isn't it true that we have this capacity to be reflectively aware right now that this experience is being known? And it's like we can't even shut off that wakefulness. We can stop recognizing it for sure, right? We can be distracted and therefore unaware that there's almost like a mirror, this reflective quality of the mind that is just reflecting that it's like this. So when we're absorbed in some thought or in some activity, we might be, in a sense, conscious in the sense of not tripping over stuff we're seeing or hearing, but we might not be mindful. We might not be awake, because being awake is a special, it's a reflective knowing what the mind is doing, what the mind is knowing. So there may be consciousness, but can we be aware of what the mind now is conscious of? Like the sound of the jet in the room. Oh yeah, hearing is being known. Or like, when's the last time you noticed, oh yeah, there's seeing happening? Because seeing is happening probably for all of us. Even if your eyes are closed, there's some kind of visual experience being known. Touching is being known. And we can train ourselves to be awake, and it is so helpful. So in this Buddhist context, when we gather in this kind of way, especially around the study of the Buddhist teachings, we take refuge not in the Buddha, a person who died 2,500 years ago. We're taking refuge in wakefulness itself, this capacity, so that we learn to value it. Because it's easy, because it's relatively subtle, it's easy to forget about it. And we take refuge in Dhamma. Dhamma is the way it is. So it's the activity that can be reflectively known by Buddha, by wakefulness. What does wakefulness wake up to? What is it sensitive to? The way it is. And this word Dhamma, Dhammang is the way it's printed here. It has different shades of meaning in the Buddhist tradition. But in this context, Buddha wakes up to the way it is, the underlying nature of experience, of the mind, of this activity of the present moment. So Buddha, we take refuge in the way it is. We don't need a different moment. This moment will do fine. And then when there is that intimacy of Buddha being awake to Dhamma, the way it is, that kind of beautiful spiritual integrity, being intimate with the conditions of the moment without projecting, or if there is some projection, we're intimate with the projection too. So whatever's happening, whatever's moving, is being reflectively known. Oh yeah, it's like this. Then that intimacy allows for sangha. And this is another word that has different shades of meaning. Sometimes we think of it as spiritual community. It's not a bad way of translating it, but it has a more specific, important meaning, which is it's the kind of activity any one of us can manifest when we're that intimacy of Buddha, being awake, being intimate with Dhamma. Then how we respond, how we show up, how we interact could be rightly called Sangha, because that's what Sangha means. It's the activity of life that flows out of Buddha being intimate with Dhamma. But when we're disconnected, or when we're connecting with our projections, our programming that we have, like if I'm on autopilot, oh, I've done the Buddhist studies class so many times, I've taught about the hindrances, and I'm just sort of on autopilot, I'm not really here, then the way I'm showing up, it won't be Sangha, it will be, probably seem flat, or like Mark's disconnected, or this doesn't seem useful, right? But when we're Sangha, it's like our activity, the way we're showing up in the moment, is characterized by being appropriate. It's appropriate because the activity is literally flowing from that sensitivity, from that intimacy, not from some agenda or some expectation or for some projection, but just coming naturally, flowing naturally out of the heart or the mind that's intimate, that's connected, in both the sense of breadth and depth or subtlety, right? That continuity. And then it's only then that we really know like what to say, what not to say, how to show up in the moment. We think we got to like have a plan, but it isn't a plan that helps us be a good human being. Being intimate is what helps us. Imagine if we like every morning we had to like map out, how should I behave around this person? What should I do when I get in front of the refrigerator? And then what do I do when I go in the bathroom? Because I want to do it right. I really want to be a good person. We would be so neurotic if that was our approach to being a good person, right? Like to have it all mapped out. And it would, the notes we'd have to lug around with us. Oh, what was I supposed to do when I got here? It wouldn't work. But what does work is a very simple plan, like be intimate, be Buddha, be wakefulness, being awake, being intimate, being undefended with Dhamma, what's moving, the nature that's here, the conditions, the movements. And then, only then, we really know better how to be a human being in that moment, one moment at a time. So we do this chant, which we'll do right now. And we do it a little bit more slowly than is traditional. And you can just follow along with me. And again, I'll put it into the chat for those of you online. And let's do this together. So I'll ring the bell 3 times. Some of us like to use this gesture called Anjali, just because we care about these 3 refuges. They're not theoretical. They're for me in this life to protect me and guide me in an onward direction toward freedom. So I like using that gesture of respect. Buddhang Saranang Gacchami Dhammang Dutiyampi Buddhang Saranang Gacchami. Dutiyampi Dhammang Saranang Gacchami. Dutiyampi Sanghang Saranang Gacchami. Tatiyampi Buddhang Saranang Gacchami. Tatiyampi Dhammang Saranang Gacchami. Tatiyampi Sanghang Saranang Gacchami. And then doing what you need to do so you'll be comfortable sitting for about 20 minutes. Stretch and then settle into a silent sitting posture. Still, relatively still, upright, relaxed as best you can. You might find it useful to take a couple of long, easy breaths in and out, just as a way of settling. And realizing in your own way that it's safe to be present now, safe to be sitting, relaxed and alert. In our study this week of desire, sense desire in particular, it's not really about controlling the habits of the mind. It's really about getting interested in this activity we call sense desire. And we don't have to wait. Our whole life is really animated by desire. And some of those desires are quite useful and wholesome. Some are quite stressful and unhelpful. And what can really help to get to know this activity we call sense desire is to create a contrast, like being relatively content now to be sitting relatively still, relatively relaxed, feeling the ordinary experience of sensation of the body sitting and the breath moving here in the body. So what we do often in our meditation practice is that we kindly ask the mind to be intimate, to be present with something ordinary, like the experience of the body sitting. This breathing body sitting is like this. And we cultivate a wholesome resolve to be aware of the body as we breathe in, to be aware of the sensations of the sitting body as we breathe out. And we'll start to notice all the other impulses or compulsions to do things, to think about this or that, to move our body, to want to shut the computer off or leave the meditation hall, plan our future. But because we have this resolve just to be present, to be open and present with the sitting body, feeling things as they are, breathing in, experiencing the whole body, breathing out, experiencing the whole body, there is this possibility to start to get to know the impulse of sense desire, to feel the tug, to notice the very seductive thoughts and feeling tone that often go with those desires. And again, it's not about suppressing or repressing. It's just getting to know the territory of the mind, the conditioned or habit-bound mind, liking, wanting. But again, to begin the study, instead of putting the effort into recognizing desire, bring the effort to being content, to be aware, to be open to the experience of the whole body through the duration of breathing in. And then to be aware, open to the whole body through the duration of the exhalation. So 1/2 breath at a time. So let's take up that training. We'll continue in silence for some time now. And just see if you can notice desiring as a natural phenomena of the mind. And you can drop the question in from time to time. How's the mind doing? Is there any desiring? What's its nature? So we cultivate this relatively wholesome desire to be intimate with the breathing and the sensations of sitting. And that commitment to that desire then exposes all the other desires, the competing desires that will arise, and make it a little easier to experience them as natural phenomena. So again, we're practicing being content to be aware of breathing in and experiencing the whole body just as it is. Breathing out, experiencing the whole body just as it is. And this is a training move that then exposes or helps to reveal the other desires that will arise, whatever they might be. The desire to think about something, the desire to move. And in those moments where it doesn't seem that there are any apparent desires, notice what that experience is like, the heart or the mind, relatively free of desiring. Notice the quality of the heart and mind at those times. Be interested. do your best to sense the possibility of contentment with what's pretty ordinary, just being intimate with the breath coming in and the sense of the body sitting, totality of the body, breathing out, experiencing the whole body. And this presence with what's ordinary really creates a contrast to notice the other desires that arise. We feel the ease of that contentment to whatever degree it's present. And it makes it easier to get interested in what disturbs it, what gets in the way of that contentment with what's ordinary.
Oh my God! Did you really? Okay.
The Buddha asks us to notice when desire is present, but also to notice when desiring is not present in the heart. And again, it's not about judging, it's just about getting to know the mind, the heart. So our practice these next weeks, we want to get to know the coolness of contentment when that's present, and also get to know moments of that burning of desire, where the heart is on fire with this, oh, if only this sit would end, then it would feel so good to move the body. So we're getting familiar with that whole range from contentment to discontentment. From the identification with desiring to the wisdom that's not confused by desire. And take a moment, stretch out. So tonight, as I mentioned, will serve both as an introduction to the Course and the 5 hindrances, and going more in depth with the first hindrance of sense desire. And hopefully we'll have a little time at the end for questions or comments. Learn how to do that in our two-world system with those of you on Zoom and those here in the room. And, you know, it's probably good to understand that the Buddha talks about our practice in different ways, but it's really useful just to think of the hindrances, like what gets in the way of that settling, that clarity that comes when the mind is stable, stably present with the conditions. Why is that so hard? And then we're turning that into a study. And you know, you may somehow feel like dividing those hindrances into 5 categories is not correct, and you think it should be in 3 categories or whatever. But you know, you might find that you can fit everything in the 5 categories. It doesn't mean it's absolutely the perfect breakdown. It just means maybe it's good enough, because it's just a map to help us see. It's just like the line between North Dakota and Minnesota. It's arbitrary, you know. So some of the distinctions between those hindering forces in the mind might be arbitrary, but it isn't about being absolutely, that the map being absolutely correct. What's important is using the map to be intimate, more and more intimate with the conditions as they are, in a way that leads to the mind dropping what's extra, what doesn't actually align with the way it is. And there's, let me just read from a chapter in Joseph Goldstein's book about desire. Get my hand on it here. This is from his book, Insight Meditation. It's a great book, written maybe now 25 years ago. And he just has different topics, including the topic of desire. And he writes that grasping force of tanha, which usually gets translated as craving, runs very deep in our consciousness. In fact, the Buddha said that this kind of desire or craving is the driving force of samsara, the entire round of existence. So in a way, we think superficially that, well, because I'm here, I have desire. But actually, in Buddhist cosmology, this world exists because of craving. And the sort of mind, body, this person, this predicament, my situation, it arises because of the force of craving. And craving, technically, is just desire with ignorance. Desire without understanding what it is. Because desire is just the animating force of life. It's kind of like what's moving moves because of desire. We don't say the wind desires to blow from the north or whatever direction it's blowing right now. It's like, oh, come on, Mark, that's a natural phenomena. There's no desire, because we always associate like a personal agent with desire. But how about if we think of desire as just any movement? Like the leaves desire, the trees rather desire to drop their leaves in the fall? Or do I desire to put food in my mouth? Or is that just a natural movement? So that's just a way, like, to create more interest as we begin to study the force of desire, and how desire, that force, that movement that just comes with being alive, how it gets entangled with attachment, or with a sense of self, a sense of me, a sense of promise, like if, then, that somebody. And what's that force without that? Because all we're doing is looking at that movement with different eyes, with a different point of view, from the habitual point of view. Like, again, using that example of weather, as if there were some consciousness that even could be ours. Like they've done, in human history, they've personalized. It's very common in human culture to personalize natural forces, right? The different nature spirits, or the Greek gods, or the whatever, throwing lightning bolts, or whatever they might do. So now we're doing the opposite. Instead of personalizing everything, we're depersonalizing everything. And especially this force that we have a very strong habit of personalizing, the force of desire, the movement of desire. Let me just read some more from this. Observe carefully what happens in your mind, to your mind, when it becomes entranced in the forest of desire. It's like being lost in an enchanted maze, or wrapped in a delusive dream world. We weave many thoughts and fantasies around the experience we either are having or want to have, and we bind ourselves in the chains of attachment. And that's the interesting thing we'll be able to observe over and over again in our meditations and in our daily life. The first moments of desire seem very innocent, because it really is being experienced and felt as just a natural movement. It's just a natural movement of attraction. We think about ice cream, or we see something, or we hear something. You heard the jets during the meditation, maybe some of you, and you thought about traveling somewhere, And at first it's just, oh yeah. But then the entanglement begins, right? And this is the thing about desire that we'll get to learn is how complex, how complicating it gets. See, once we have taken the bait, and there's a sense of somebody liking the promise of desire, then there's also a somebody who doesn't want the promise of that desire to go away, to end, to cease, because it's a betrayal. And that's true whether I gratify the desire or not. Like if I start, it's just an innocent sound of a jet, and it triggers a thought of flying somewhere. Oh yeah, I could go visit my friend in the Bay Area or something like that. Oh, I always have so much fun. And then we think about, well, how could I carve that time away from work? And how will I pay for it? And what will I do when I'm there? Oh yeah, my friend has this other friend and I really don't like that friend. Would it be wrong of me to say when I come to visit that we not spend time with that other person? You see, and then oh, but what happens if I get COVID? Should I wear a mask in the plane? And the whole thing gets, and the thing is we don't want to put it down like, oh, just forget about it. Because that hope, that promise, seeing my friend in San Francisco, right? That feels real. And to just drop the desiring is a kind of betrayal. I remember Sharon Salzberg a long time ago saying she noticed once when she was hiking in the Sierra Mountains, I think, with some friends, that the beginning part of the hike there was just a lot of downhill. And then eventually, somewhere in the middle of the day-long hike, the thought occurred to her, in a dualistic world, when you go down, 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 then you got to go up, 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 up. And all of a sudden, the pleasure of the day of hiking changed, right? Because you realize, and it's the same thing with desiring. With attachment, the craving, when the mind takes the bait and gets entangled with the hope, the promise of desire that somebody's going to get something, because that's a manufactured high. And even if we get that desire gratified, we actually fly to San Francisco, we eat what we want to eat, or we get the massage we want, the betrayal will come when there's attachment to desire, because whatever that desire is, it's going to go away. Either we gratify it and it goes away, or it gets just too heavy to keep wanting it and we drop it. But one way or another, we're going to be disappointed when it ends. And it's a little bit like that story. I know it seems a little maybe obscure, that idea that, when there's down, there's up. But that's what happens with attachment to desire. And this is what we can observe all week long. Because next week we'll be moving on to aversion. But there's some basic principles in learning about desire that will be helpful for our study of anything that hinders, anything that disturbs the mind, breaks up the continuity of awareness, takes the mind away from a sense of dispassion and contentment and peace with conditions. And and it's the same thing like with aversion when it's like, it's really the same principle. It's like, oh, this scares me, or I want this pain to go away. And it's like, there's this idea that when we get away from it, that I'll be safe. And it's such a betrayal when we realize it's never over. we're never ever done with threats and insults and unpleasantness. So that promise, oh, that will feel so good, yeah, but it doesn't really change things. And that's what we want to observe, is how it's almost like an addiction to the intensity of desiring more than the objects we desire. There's something juicy and enlivening about the promise, the potential, the possibilities. And we don't really know what to do with. I remember Ajahn Sumedho writing or saying once, Buddhist practitioners, people generally, and Buddhist practitioners, they really like the idea of peace, but not so much the experience initially. Right? It's like, we feel so put upon in life, so pushed around by our desires and our fears. And so what we're trying to do is cultivate a taste for our heart that isn't entranced by pleasure and isn't overwhelmed by pain. And it doesn't mean that we're oblivious and we don't move away when it's too hot because it's painful, or consume something because it's available and it's pleasant and helpful to eat it or to have it. It just means, like, you can use this next time you get your Amazon package, whatever it is, or you go buy something that you want, just notice the tendency to want to indulge in that pleasure of gratification, and just look for other ways to deal with the experience of having the package arrive. Oh, it's good that it got here. It's good that no one stole it. Hopefully it will be useful, worth the effort it took to earn the money or whatever to be able to afford it. But wouldn't it be helpful to tag on, but in the great scheme of things, it's not really a cause for deeper happiness, having or not having this. Because if I do think that my deeper happiness, what the happiness I really care about, is dependent on this, you see what a setup that is. That I gotta guard it. It's like, and it's almost like we wanna, I don't know if people of my generation remember watching the movie when it came out. What was it called? Maud, or when the young man falls in love with the older woman? With Harold and Maude, thanks, Cam. Came out maybe in the early 70s. And there's a great scene. So it's a younger man falls in love with an older woman and gives her, I think, an engagement ring, as I remember it at least. And she's so touched and moved, looks at it, maybe even tries it on, I forget. And then she takes it and throws it in the lake. It says, well, now I'll always know where it is. And that's the kind of thing, like, to get what comes our way that's appropriate to receive, a nice meal, a good time with a friend, a beautiful day of weather like we had today, to really let it land. Totally, it's like we're totally into being intimate, present with it, but not the sticky stuff, not any dependence. It's really nice that the conditions are pleasant right now, but I'm choosing not to be dependent on my good fortune of having a nice day of weather, having a nice place to live, having good health. I'm not going as far as dependence. So what does it mean to be in a world where there is sense gratification? Hopefully, if you're fortunate and you have some nice experiences during the next week, and really explore, like, what is it like to really let it in, to really be there, but to be on the lookout for any sense of dependence, fear of it not being there, fear of it going away, fear of it ending. So that's one kind of training mechanism. Another is like, strategically notice some desires and on purpose don't gratify them. I mean, just not that anybody would do this, but why not? It would be actually pretty simple to do it, and it would be a really good learning, because no one is going to probably die if you skip a lunch or skip a dinner or skip breakfast. So skip a meal, consider this, or anything, right? You could just substitute something else if you don't want to do something as dramatic as skipping a meal. Skip dessert or something like that. Or whatever little sense treat that you generally give yourself. And know you're going to skip it. And notice the anticipation. Notice the anticipation. See the desire build. See all the different ways the mind convinces you that this is silly. You get what it's like, desire, but, you can do it tomorrow. Tomorrow would be a better day to do it. And you just see so many, and then and it can get really strong, like the force. No, we're going to just eat. And, but you want to really refrain, because you want to see that the desiring ceases without gratification. Right? Because there are a lot of things we really wanted in our life that we couldn't gratify. Is that true? So where's that desiring now? Those things, that person we wanted to love us, or that car that we wanted to buy, or that trip we wanted to take, that body we wanted to have. It's interesting, I'm in my mid-60s, and there's just a lot of things that were possibilities that I do in my life that are less likely, right? You just, options begin to diminish. Well, I probably won't take that trip. Probably won't do this with my life. Not too many moves left in terms of career. And just to sort of see that, the absence of that desire. And it has kind of a coolness, and it's can even be a little unnerving, because it sort of begs the question, well, maybe that's true with all desires. They're just a lot of bluff, a lot of color, ornate, seductive in that sort of superficial sense, but really nothing behind it. And that's what we want to start to see with our desires. Really, and we only see that when we don't suppress them. We're interested in them. You could even, just be playful, pull out a catalog. Okay, a catalog that is of interest to you. Or go to Zillow, which I do sometimes, and search for cabins around Lake Superior. And it's just so interesting to see the bloom, and it's sort of how many, there are generally 20 photographs per home, per cabin, something like that. It's probably average. And it's how many facts and photographs before the mind can't really hold up the one who wants anymore. And the whole thing kind of implodes. And even now when I go to the Zillow site, I notice there's sort of kind of underneath, there's this the simile from the Buddhist text from the time of the Buddha is, the simile the Buddha used was that dog being thrown a bunch of bones by a really skilled butcher who was able to take every little last bit of meat off of the bones. And as the story goes from the suttas, there's just a little blood smeared on the bones. That's all that's left. So the dog is seduced, thinking food, but it's just bone, And eventually the dog realizes there's not really anything here for me. And that's a little bit like these places of desiring in our lives. It doesn't even mean that we won't buy a cabin on Lake Superior or get married or go get a treat from our refrigerator or whatever. It just means it's just too heavy to imagine that it's more than what it is. It's just going to be a cup of green tea. It's just going to be eating those leftovers. It's just going to be a cabin you have to drive 3.5 hours to if you're lucky, if not longer, and we'll have to constantly repair. It's just what it is. And it doesn't mean it won't even be nice. I have someone I've been seeing for probably almost 25 years now, a shiatsu practitioner who I think is great, and unfortunately he's moving in a few months. And almost every month for most of the last 20 or 25 years I've seen this person. And it's just interesting now, it's a nice experience. I always feel better. We have a really nice relationship. But it's like I've gone, from the place of, 3 more days, and then I'll have that and it will fix me, to I've gone through the other end so many times now that I don't believe any of those stories I tell myself. Yeah, it will be a nice experience, and then it'll be over, and I'll feel kind of worn out for the rest of the day, and it probably does some good, but it's never removed suffering in my life. It hasn't changed the game, right? Same thing with all the nice meals we've had. Has it changed the game? Or the nice hugs? Or the nice times with a friend? Doesn't mean we have to stop having a nice massage or a nice meal or a nice time with a friend, but we want to start teasing out that promise, that story, the dependence, the story that comes with a dependence. There's somebody who is seemingly dependent on needing and having and getting and consuming this. And there will be somebody who will feel betrayed and harmed by not getting it. We don't have to do that piece. So that's the exploration this week with desire, is just to get interested. And to get interested in the whole build-up, like when the mind is seduced and it is going through that whole process of building up the sense of a me who's going to be delighted and changed by getting what I want to have, then notice how your mind does it. Like, how does it construct that very convincing promise? If you get this, you're going to be there will be a you who will be substantially affected in a positive way by getting it. It will matter. So it's appropriate for you to be dependent, so that if you don't get it, you should be disappointed. You will be harmed. You will be lesser by not having this. That's the lie, basically, that we concoct. So then, when that's happening, get interested in how the mind is doing it, because that's how we undermine the process, isn't by trying to stop the process, but by really getting to know it. Like, how does the mind tell the lie? And you don't even have to say it that way, because that could be a way of being averse to desiring, to kind of call it a lie. But how is the mind doing the desiring? Like, what is the mind paying attention to? What information, what image does the mind keep bringing to mind? Like, when you're around somebody who's attractive to you, what do you keep bringing to mind about that person? What do you want to look at, or what do you want to remember? What do you imagine? Because when we're spinning the construction of craving, of wanting, of the promise, then it's an actual real-time construction. The mind is constructing some meaning that spellbounds the mind. It's like we dress something up, and then we kind of believe the mirage, or the one teacher describes this in terms of a theater company that's just got a bunch of props in the back, and this little stool could serve as so many different items. In theater, you could kind of make things work, you little makeup, a little stagecraft, and you could create a medieval, castle, or you could create a futuristic this or that, and you just got a bunch of plywood and little this and that's, and magic, right? And especially these days with graphics, digital, you can make anything. And this is the thing about the desiring. It's this production studio where the mind builds something so compelling, even awakening, nirvana, right? Oh, if only I get my act together as a Buddhist practitioner, then I'll be free. So that becoming energy, that's part of that craving. So you want to get to know, in a way, we're deconstructing the stagecraft of craving, desiring. Not out of aversion, but just because we want to get to know things as they are. Buddha being intimate with Dhamma, right? We just want to see it. And if it falls apart, it's not because we're trying to make it fall apart, because that's aversion. So it is nice when the whole thing pops, where we've been wrapped up, whether it's like wanting this person to love us, or wanting to get this promotion, or wanting to change my life in this way, self-help way. And then the whole thing falls apart, and it's like such a relief. In some ways, initially we're betrayed, and then it's like, because it's like that being the person who was dependent on something, getting something, becoming somebody, it's such a weight, even with awakening. And there's a difference between aspiration and this craving. Like sensing what's possible, and really that sense of what's possible really helps us be intimate with the here and now. It kind of guides us along the way. So that's another thing to tease out, because if we misunderstand the teachings on sense desire, there really is this shadow of being against sense experience. Okay, so the answer is not to see, not to taste, not to smell, not to touch, not to hear, and not to think about any of that stuff. Then I'll be free, right? And that doesn't make sense, because it's just aversion to our karmic situation of being a sensitive, living human being. We don't really have any choice but to explore what freedom looks like when there is this life animated by desire. To breathe, to move, to connect, to belong, to eat, to sleep, to be away from danger. We don't need to pathologize these desires. We just have to learn how to live with them, not making them more than what they are, and not trying to make them less than what they are. And that's why we're going to study them all week long. There's a quote I like to read from Sylvia Boorstein, because it just really cuts right to the point here. A couple of quotes here. One is, desire pulls so hard, it's surprising to find that it's empty. And that's where you want to have enough stability, enough interest, so you can really observe desire. And that real, actual tug. Like sometimes, I talk about this sometimes, and I had my chocolate today. Sometimes, I'll go out of the way to get chocolate. And it's just like really interesting to study the tug the whole way. Is this, what is this? What is this force? Even as you're walking into the store, and even as you're unwrapping it, even as you're eating it, what is this? And to just see the kind of the falseness, the magic of our desires. And like I said earlier, really be on the lookout that it's less about the experience. I mean, I really realized this about chocolate. Chocolate's not actually that tasty. I mean, sugar is sugar. And milky creaminess is milky creaminess. But chocolate, it's something. And we start to get that's true with about every sense desire. And what really, maybe Shelly will cover this, or I'll cover it in one of the later weeks, but there's that really important discourse where the Buddha talks about the second dart. And I won't go through the whole thing because we only have a few minutes left, but the point I want to make here is that getting a sense pleasure seems big because we haven't learned what to do with unpleasantness. So we get desperate for a little break from a lot of the unpleasantness of life when we have a little sense pleasure. So little sense pleasures like getting some chocolate or watching a funny TV show or whatever else that you can connect with in your life that's pleasant to you. It's like all of a sudden it becomes this huge thing because I feel so oppressed by the aches in my body, or by my job that I hate, or by this relationship that I'm in that doesn't feel so healthy. So then I'm totally desperate to get a little high from my beer, or my wine, or from my TV show, or from my whatever, pornography, or whatever we use to give the mind a little hit of pleasantness. And then we have a temporary break, but we always have to go back. And it's like that's that equal and opposite. It's not only do we go back, but there's that betrayal. The pleasantness really didn't fix it. So we get more desperate for pleasantness. And this is what we start to unpack, this whole addiction, that this is what's behind so much of our conditioning and dependence on pleasantness, is that we haven't figured out how to be a human being in a world where there's unavoidable unpleasantness. There's the pain of loss, there's the pain of insecurity, that's just the unreliableness and insecurity of everything, let alone the aches and pains of the aging body and sickness and getting splinters and smelling unpleasant smells and, just the ordinary things that come with life that are unavoidable. So I'll finish with this last quote from Sylvia Boorstein. I need to keep rediscovering that the pain of the struggle is greater than the pain of the desire. So the struggle to get what I desire, that's what she's talking about. That pain, to be dependent on what I want, to be dependent on what I find pleasant, is more painful than the pain of just feeling the ache of desire. And she goes on, if I develop the habit of refraining myself, I'll enjoy the relief of feeling desires pass, and I'll remember that desires are not the problem. Feeling pushed around by them is. So suffering is being pushed around by desire. Suffering is not being a human being with desires. If only I weren't a sexual being. If only I didn't have taste buds. If only I didn't know the difference between a pleasant visual experience and an unpleasant, no. If only I could find a way not to be pushed around by my desires. And we've got this week and the rest of our lives to explore, like, okay, I'm a desiring human being. That would be a nice way to wake up tomorrow morning, taking the class. Okay, I'm a desiring human being. I'm going to fully own that. I'm not going to be afraid of that. I'm not going to pretend that it ain't so. How to be a desiring human being without being pushed around by the desiring, confused by it, imagining that the desiring is more than what it is. And the last sentence here, I'll continue to have desires, of course, because I'm alive, but they'll be more modest in their demands. So, may it be so. So we'll come back next week. Shelly will be here, so we'll just alternate weeks. And Shelly will talk a little bit more about desires and begin talking about aversion next week. And then in your small groups, it will be the time to just share any learning, any questions that are emerging for you around the study of sense desire. What have you noticed? What feeds it? What happens in the experience of gratification? What happens when you don't gratify it? Or any learning whatsoever. I look forward to doing the class together. Thanks for coming, everyone, online and here in the room. And again, if you're willing to be a program host here in the building in one of the weeks coming up, just if you could just connect with me at the end. And I'll just mention both online and here in person, Shelly Graf will be leading a half-day retreat this coming Saturday. So think if that makes sense in your life, 9 o'clock. Kevin Griffin is coming later in the month. Wonderful teacher visiting from California. I think some of his programs will be both online and in person on Saturday the 24th and Sunday the 25th. You can check out our online calendar to find out more about that. Have a good week of practice, everyone. Hope to see you down the road.